What is up, my beautiful gemstones? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today I'm going to be giving you all a sneak peek into my newest book, Gone Mysterious Disappearances Volume 3, which will be released hopefully by the end of August. Gone 1 and 2 are out already. You guys did amazing helping me with sales for that, and instead of turning the Yuba County 5 into a two-part series on my channel, I figured I can kill two birds with one stone by reading to you exactly what I put in the book about this case and still getting my point across and getting the case across to you guys. So without further ado, let's jump right in. In my line of work, as strange as it may seem, it's a bit exciting when I find a case where people have gone missing in very mysterious ways together. I don't say that with any disrespect or without regard to the feelings of the loved ones of anyone who has gone missing, but I mean it in a way that it makes the case I'm trying to state that much more believable. Or at least it should. It's one thing for a single person to go missing in the middle of the wilderness somewhere under mysterious circumstances. I mean, how easy is it to just get lost when hiking a trail near your home where the woods even aren't that deep, at least for most people? This case has always fascinated me and it's haunted me, and I'm hoping that by sharing it with you here in this book, you will understand maybe a bit more about what's happening out there, possibly more so than when we are just talking about one person going missing. With one person, a skeptic can speculate anything and there's really no way at all to refute it. It's just skeptics' opinions versus believers' opinions and thoughts. I don't think that's going to be the case with the Yuba County 5, as there's so much evidence of something very, very strange happening here. Something that almost certainly doesn't involve other human beings being involved. No one can ever convince me that this case isn't supernatural or otherworldly in some way, shape, or form, and so I'm anxious to know what you guys are going to think about it. The Yuba County 5, sometimes known as the Yuba City Boys, is one of California's most baffling and enduring mysteries. On the night of February 25th, 1975, 4 men who all had either some sort of psychiatric condition or intellectual disability from Yuba County, California, attended a college basketball game at California State University at Chico, also known as Chico State. The men were Bill Sterling, who was 29 years old, Jackie Hewitt, who was 24, Ted Ware, 32 years old, Jack Madruga, 30, and Gary Mathias, 25. 4 of them would be found dead under very bizarre circumstances, and one of them hasn't been found yet. Each of these men, because of their varied disabilities, lived with their parents, and they were all residents of Yuba City, close to Marysville, California. The men played basketball together on a team called the Gateway Gators, which was supported by a local program that supported people with mental disabilities in sport. On the night in question, February 25th, 1975, the Gators would play their first game in a week-long tournament, which was sponsored by the Special Olympics. The winner of the tournament would receive a week-long stay in Los Angeles, all expenses paid. So the winners, I guess you would say, because everyone on the team that won would receive this all expenses paid trip or vacation to Los Angeles. The 5 men were very excited, and they all laid out their uniforms the night before, with all of them asking their parents to make sure that they were up on time. However, on the night of the 24th, the men decided to go and watch a basketball game together 50 miles away in Chico, California. Only Gary and Jack had driver's licenses, and Jack decided he wanted to drive that night. Now, what I found out after I wrote this, and I'm going to go back and add it in, is that actually Jack is the one who always drove because he was totally in love with his car and he totally loved driving. Also, there are a lot of sources that say Jack was always driving because he was the only one with the license, whereas the sources I came upon said Gary and Jack both had licenses. So Jack was driving that night, and the group piled into his turquoise and white 1969 Mercury Montego and drove north to watch the game. After the Davis team, whom the men were rooting for, won the game, the Yuba County 5 got back into the car to go home. They stopped first a few miles away from where they had just watched the game at Bears Market in downtown Chico in order to purchase some snacks, sodas, and some cartons of milk to drink. The clerk actually remembered the men coming in last night because he would later say that the store closed at 10 that night, and he was annoyed that such a large group had come in so shortly before closing time. He said that their entrance had delayed him in doing what he needed to do to start the closing of the store for the night and going home himself. This was the last time these 5 men would ever be seen alive, and bare surveillance footage showed them paying for the items and leaving. None of them seemed to be under any duress or in any sort of danger in the surveillance footage. Though the boys all met at a day program for handicapped adults, it's important I mention here that these men were reasonably able to function out in society. Jack Madruga was considered to be just a little bit slow, for lack of better words, and he even had a driver's license and was usually the one to drive the group around. Though Gary Mathias had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, he took medication for it regularly and was seemingly doing fine at the time of the disappearance. Both of those men could drive, and both even had served in the military, so there was no real reason that anyone would have worried that anything was going to go wrong. In fact, when these 5 men got together, they almost always were either doing so to play basketball or watching basketball. They each had a deep, deep love for this sport. After purchasing their snacks and loading back into the car, they got on the highway and started to head home. They would never make it there, though. They all ended up missing their basketball game the next day, a game that was so incredibly important to each and every one of them, and that's when their parents and loved ones really started to worry. The county sheriff's department was called in and began a search of the route that the missing men had taken. The authorities honestly thought that the men had simply decided to stay an extra night in Chico and had gotten lost somewhere along the route home. However, no sign of the men or their vehicle was found. 3 days later, on February 28th, a park ranger who had nothing to do with the initial search and had nothing to do with the investigation called in to say he had found the missing vehicle on a remote and winding dirt road in the mountains of Plumas National Forest. He had read a missing persons bulletin about the men and had decided to contact the proper authorities. The finding of this vehicle was the first of many very strange and mysterious things about this case. For one, where it was found was nowhere near anywhere the men should have been that night. It was nowhere near anything at all for that matter, and considering how the men had been dressed when they left their homes the night before to go to the Davis game, it made absolutely zero sense. It was snowing in Plumas and all around it, and they were only wearing light jackets and clothing not fit for hiking or camping in severe weather. No one understood what the vehicle being found in that spot meant, and still no one does. The car was unlocked, but the keys were nowhere to be found, and one window was wide open. Although the car was seemingly stuck in the snow, it was determined rather quickly that the 5 men would have easily been able to push it out and be on their way, especially considering the fact that the car was in good working order and nothing was found to be wrong with it mechanically at all. Inside of the car, the authorities found the discarded wrappers from the snacks the men had purchased on the last night they were seen alive, and some maps of California and that area were also found. However, no sign of the men still was found. The men's families were especially baffled, and none of them could figure out why they would have even taken that route into nowhere to begin with. Why would they have gone driving up a treacherous, unknown, winding road up the side of a snowy mountain in the first place? It was incomprehensible. Making it even stranger was the fact that the men had all been so very excited about the basketball game they were playing in the following night, and they hadn't mentioned stopping anywhere other than to watch the Davis game. They were all adamant about getting home early enough to get a good night's sleep, so they were ready and at their best to play and possibly win the trip to Los Angeles. Also, why had they left the car in that spot in the first place? The area was extremely remote, not traveled at all, not to mention the inadequate clothing they were all wearing. Everyone was wondering why in the world they would leave a perfectly good, completely working, and warm vehicle to go off up the side of a snowy and dangerous mountain on foot. It really does make absolutely no sense whatsoever. As the authorities waited for the snow to melt, they started to receive some very strange leads. One such lead was a man calling himself Joseph Shawns, who called in to report that at the time of the disappearances, he too had been stuck in the snow while driving up to a ski cabin he owned in the same area where Jack's car was found abandoned. He had been by himself, and so he couldn't push his car out of the snowdrift, and he also said he felt like he was about to have a heart attack, and so he decided to just sit there in his car and wait for someone to pass by who might help him. As he sat there in the dark, surrounded by nothing but snow and dense forest, he said that 2 cars, one that looked like a pickup truck The other he couldn't see had stopped right behind him. A group of people with flashlights got out of the vehicles as he watched, and he figured he would ask them for help. In extreme pain from what he thought was a heart attack, Joseph screamed out, pleading and begging for the strangers to help him. However, as soon as they heard his voice, they turned off their flashlights, got back into their trucks, and quickly drove away. They had heard him calling for help, and instead of helping, they took off like a bat out of hell out of there. Strangely enough, too, he said that one of the people who was out there that night was a woman who had been holding a baby. He made no mention at all of the other second car he claimed had pulled up behind him that night. Joseph said that he had finally gotten some help and went back to the lodge. His vehicle was towed, but he claimed that the spot where he had been stopped that night was right next to where the Montego was found. Nothing ever came of this lead, and still to this day, no one knows what, if any, significance it has concerning the Yuba County Five. A clerk from a store in the nearby small town of Brownsville, which is located about 30 miles away from the abandoned car, said that 4 of the missing men had come into the store 2 days after they were reported as missing, and that they had been riding in a red pickup truck. The clerk said she recognized the men from missing persons flyers she had seen. She reported that Bill Sterling and Jackie Hewitt had used the payphone in a phone booth before the truck drove off with them inside of it. The owner of the store corroborated the clerk's account, adding that the 2 men had entered the store and bought burritos and soft drinks, and that he and his clerk hadn't really thought much about it until they saw someone distributing the missing persons flyers. Although this sighting was treated as being highly credible, no one could understand why any of the men would be in a red pickup truck when they had abandoned a perfectly good and properly functioning vehicle up the side of a mountain. All over the area, there were various sightings of all of the men, but the police were never able to confirm any of them. In fact, most of the sightings, tips, and leads weren't thought to be credible at all, and the police never gained any useful information out of any of them. The police thought that it was possible that there was evidence out there near the vehicle, but that it was covered up by the large amounts of snow out there. They decided to wait for the spring and kept their fingers crossed. By the time June rolled around, the area's high-altitude snow had almost completely melted away. On June 4th, some motorcyclists were passing through the area when they made a macabre discovery in an uninhabited ranger's trailer cabin that was located about 19 miles through rough and snowy terrain away from where the Montego had been abandoned. The inside of the trailer was frigid even in the summer month, and the body of Ted Ware was found first. This corpse, the way it was found, added so much more bizarre mystery to an already extremely disturbing case. For one, Ted was fully clothed except for his shoes, and his shoes weren't anywhere in sight. He had 8 sheets that he was bundled up in such a way that it would have been impossible for him to have done it himself. However, it's unclear whether or not it was done before or after he died. His body was partially frostbitten, and this was strange as well because there were plenty of flammable materials in the cabin, as well as a whole bunch of matches. There was also a fireplace, and yet no attempt at starting any fires for warmth had ever been made at all. No one made any attempt to try and use a propane tank that was directly attached to the cabin either, when in fact it was there specifically for the purpose of starting a fire in the fireplace. It was literally designed that way, and presumably too, it was very obvious how all of it worked. All someone would have had to have done was turn the nozzle, and it would have turned on, and they would have been nice and warm. On a table next to the body, there was a watch that no one who knew Ted, including his family, recognized, and it was missing its little crystal, the little crystal thing inside of the watch. To make things even weirder, if you can believe it, was that the deceased man had 3 months worth of beard growth. Yeah, that's right. This suggested that he had even been alive in the cabin for a long time before succumbing to death. On top of all of that, the cause of death wasn't what anyone expected it to be. The official cause of the death of Ted Ware was starvation. He had lost about 100 pounds before he died, despite the fact that he had literally been surrounded with all different kinds of food. Scattered all around the cabin were sea rations, and most of them had been open, with some of them having been half eaten. There was also a locker that was stocked with a full year's worth of untouched cans of food and freeze-dried rations. With all of this being said, how in the world did this man end up starving to death? This makes no sense. The day after Ted Weir was found, the bodies of Bill Sterling and Jack Madruga were found. They were 8 miles away from the cabin where Ted had been discovered, and while Jack's body had been ravaged and picked apart by scavengers, he very oddly had his hand clasped around his wristwatch. Bill's body was nothing but a skeleton, and it was unclear if the men had ever been to the trailer or not. It was presumed they had walked away and left Ted there for whatever reason, but I'll save that for the speculation and rumor part of this story at the end. 2 days after those two were found, the skull, spine, and shoes of Jackie Hewitt were found strewn all around the wilderness surrounding the trailer where Ted was found. The coroner thought that all 3 of these men had died of hypothermia, but no one was ever able to tell for sure how they actually met their demise. What was the cause? Despite an extensive and intensive search of the entire area for miles in every direction, Gary Mathias has never been found. His tennis shoes, however, were found in the trailer with Ted. Before we get into the rumors and the theories, and then what I believe really happened here, I would like to talk about the witness who called himself Joseph Sconge. There's another telling of his story that says he actually had an actual heart attack while trying to push his car out of the snowdrift, and he fell to the ground. That's when the pickup truck came driving up and stopped behind him. He also claimed in this particular version of the story that after they had initially left, the group of people with flashlights, including the woman with the baby, had come back about 2 hours later, but that they still hadn't bothered to help him. He then said he had to walk back to the ski cabin he owned in the area while or after having a severe heart attack. His car was towed. I couldn't for the life of me find out which of these stories is true, and I included them both because they're equally bizarre. Now, let's discuss what might have happened with the Yuba County Five. How and why had these men abandoned a perfectly good and well-running vehicle to walk 19 miles up the side of a treacherous and snow-filled mountain on foot and through a blizzard while wearing nothing but clothing appropriate for springtime? They had to have walked in order to get to the cabin, right? What happened once they got there? The thing that throws me off the most is the fact that they could have easily gotten a fire going and had enough food to feed themselves until they were found, until months later, even if they did feel like they were lost up there and they didn't want to either attempt to get their way, to find their way back, or even try, right? They had enough food and they had warmth. Also, it seems as though Ted Weir just kind of laid there and waited to die, but why? No one has ever been able to determine if all of the men even made it to the cabin in the first place. We know Ted was found there, and we also know Gary Mathias made it there, presumably because that's where his shoes were found. But why would he leave the cabin where there was plenty of food and ample opportunities to start a warm fire to walk off barefooted into the snowy woods and die? Speaking of shoes, where were Ted's? And also, who had wrapped him up so tightly in 8 sheets where it looked like he wouldn't have even been able to move? And had they done it before or after he died? Why had they done that? This doesn't make any sense, at least in my opinion, because if you remember, there were maps of the region, several of them left behind in the car they abandoned. Also, the road the vehicle was found on is so far removed from the route the men should have been taking that night that it makes no sense at all that they would have just as simply made a wrong turn and gotten lost. They never could have accidentally made it there, in other words. Other people have speculated that maybe the guys had a friend or friends in the area, and that perhaps that's where they had been headed that night, and that's how they ended up so discombobulated and seemingly so, and turned around. However, these men lived with their parents, and they weren't known for keeping things from each other or their families. Their parents more than likely would have known if they had friends in the area, and surely at least one of them would have mentioned that when they left that evening, but none of them did. So they would have said, we're going to the Davis game, and then we're going to so-and-so's house. Who's so-and-so? So-and-so's my friend. This is where they live. See you later. The fact of the matter is, these men only hung out with one another. It's incredibly unlikely that they somehow got lost on their way to a friend's house, but in playing devil's advocate, let's say that they were on their way to someone's house. Why then, when they realized they were lost, did they not just backtrack? Remember, they had plenty of maps in the area. Also, no one has ever come forward claiming to have had plans with any of those 5 men that night. Not a single one of them. Now, there is a rumor that's been spread around where people have speculated that maybe the men ran into the group of nefarious characters, like the ones that Joseph Sean told investigators he saw once or possibly even twice that night. Maybe those people, or at least one of them, ran into the Yuba County Five, or one of them, and somehow talked them into either giving them a ride somewhere or following them up into the mountain for whatever reason. It makes a bit more sense than anything else we've come across, but only on the surface. Think about it. Why would they lure the men out there and then leave them to roam the woods and die? Also, no evidence was ever found that anyone else had been in the cabin or around it at the time that the men were there. Also, as I think about it now, why would they lure them up there to leave them in a fully stocked cabin? I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because it's ridiculous. Where it's like, here, we've now kidnapped you. We've taken the couple of dollars y'all have had between you. We're not taking your vintage car, which would be the only thing worth money. Stay here and live a little while. While the men being lured or taken and then murdered makes sense at first, when we try to play it out in our heads, it really doesn't add up. Although there's been no evidence at all of a mysterious group of people or some inscrutable person being with the men that night for whatever reason, an unnamed family member of one of the men has stated, quote, there was some force that made them go up there. They wouldn't have fled off into the wood like a bunch of quail. We know good and well that somebody made them do it. We can't visualize someone getting the upper hand on those 5 men, but we know it must have been. They seen something at that game, at the parking lot. They might have seen it and didn't even realize they seen it, end quote. Now, I believe if the men had seen something at the game, whether in the parking lot or elsewhere, they wouldn't have been in such good spirits and seemed so perfectly normal while shopping for their snacks at Bear Market, right? But originally, my initial reaction before researching deeper into this case was that someone or a group of someones accosted them in the parking lot of the market. Another thing to consider before we move on to what I think could have happened, I should mention that whatever they were doing out there, if they had merely been doing something like looking for their car keys or otherwise being lost for some reason, the men passed a perfectly well-functioning ski lodge with plenty of people they could have gone to for help inside and around it. They never saw anyone else out there as far as we know, meaning no one ever came forward claiming to have seen the men that night, and the mysterious figures in the pickup truck, including the woman with the baby or the pregnant woman, have never been identified or come out as having been in the area that night either. This case is often referred to as the American Dyatlov Pass incident, and I'm covering Dyatlov Pass either next week or the following week. And if you have no idea what Dyatlov Pass is, then stay tuned because that case will be in this book as well. That particular statement does strike me as very interesting, to say the least, because I now believe I know what happened to the young people involved in the original Dyatlov Pass incident, and it's very possible that the same entity or a similar entity is responsible for what happened here with the Yuba County 5. Was it Bigfoot? Could it have been a UFO or extraterrestrials? Those are the very things responsible for the original case, in my humble opinion, and based on years of research I've dedicated to investigating that case myself. I absolutely believe that these 5 men weren't going to anyone's house that night after the game, and I don't believe for a second they were lured out there by a group of hoodlums or so-called rednecks either. I personally think they saw something in the sky and decided to try and track or chase down whatever it was. Maybe they were being chased by whatever it was. Keeping in mind these men had some psychological, mental, and emotional disabilities, they might have not understood, like someone without those disabilities might, that investigating the unknown in the middle of nowhere up the side of a treacherous and snowy mountain may not be the best idea. Let's talk about the car for a moment. Why in the world would they leave that perfectly working vehicle to walk to their deaths in an unfamiliar mountain? I've got a logical answer for that, at least logical as it pertains to this community and what we know. There have been more documented cases than I could ever list where someone who comes across a UFO had their vehicle stall on them for no reason, and it almost always happened in the middle of nowhere. I believe that the men encountered an unidentified flying object, and it chased them into that spot where the vehicle was found, and when the car died, the men panicked and ran out into the woods to try to avoid and get away from the unidentified object. They were terrified and not paying much attention to where they were going. But what about the rest of the very strange clues? Let's see if we can maybe break those down a bit. Let's just say for this video that what I just theorized is true, and the men were running for their lives through the woods trying to escape a craft in the sky following or chasing them. Gary Mathias had fought in a war, and some of his mental disabilities were said to be a direct result of that. Maybe he decided to tell his best friends to go into the cabin, and he decided that he would be the hero and lead whatever was chasing them. And at this point, it could have been actual extraterrestrials who were running through the woods after them, for all we know, away from the cabin where he thought his friends would be safe. Perhaps he thought he would outrun or lose whatever it was that was out there with them, and then be able to return to the cabin to get his friends, and they would all wait until morning, go back to the car, and leave. Meanwhile, another war veteran was out there with the men, and that was Jack Madruga. He would have known what those rations were, and more than likely, he also would have known how to light the fireplace, even if it wasn't as obvious as it should have been to the others. While it's true that nobody actually knows whether or not Bill Sterling or Jack Madruga ever ended up at the cabin at all, I highly doubt these men split up. Ted was the only one found in the cabin, so let's move on to him. He was tucked so tightly underneath those 8 sheets that he wouldn't have been able to even move too well, and he couldn't possibly have done that to himself. There had to be someone or something there with him. I believe he could have been injured and was left there by the others so that they could go and try to find help. However, whatever his injuries weren't ever documented as far as the public is concerned, and the coroner didn't mention him having any injuries. But when we're dealing with extraterrestrials and otherworldly forces, not everything is going to add up together nice and neat. It's possible Gary switched his shoes with someone before trying to lead whatever was chasing them away, and whoever took his shoes left them for Ted in case they never made it back. He would have them so that he could then go and get himself some help. The fact that Ted never ate anything, never built a fire, and never left the cabin makes me feel even more like he may have had some injuries. Maybe they healed throughout the course of the 3 months that it took for him to die. Remember the 3 months worth of beard growth? But by that time, he was too weak to even be able to get to any of the food to eat it. It's the only thing that really makes sense to me. I believe the whole purpose of this extraterrestrial attack was for the abduction of Gary Mathias. This is just what I believe. It's just my opinions through my educated guesses and all the research I've done throughout the years into cases like this. He served our country in a war, and I believe it's possible that he saw something long before this all happened in Yuba County. That could even be the reason, or at least some of it, he was the only one that had been taken, the only one that's still missing. Extraterrestrials aren't really known for making mistakes, right? I know for many people, my theories on this one will sound more like a bad science fiction novel or movie, but I am hypothesizing based on years of research and lifelong experiences with the paranormal, supernatural, and the otherworldly myself. I've experienced spirits, ghosts, demons, fairies, extraterrestrials of all types, etc. I have personal and first-hand knowledge of a lot of these things, and whether you believe me or not, if you really stop and think about it, you will see that what I am proposing here is much more likely and makes more sense than anything else that's been speculated so far. That's if you're willing to be honest with yourself. One thing that occurred to me during the reading of this, so when I go into editing, I am going to find a way to incorporate it into the story you're going to read in the book, is that the crystal from the watch that was found by Ted in the cabin was missing, even though it wasn't Ted's watch and nobody knew where it had come from. And one of the other men was found dead in the woods clutching his watch, like for dear life. Extraterrestrials and technology. I don't know, guys, but that's all I have for you today. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, if you enjoyed hanging out with me. Spread the love by sharing this video, please. Let's grow this channel and make me even more of a badass YouTuber. I love you guys so much. Thank you for always being there and always building me up and lifting me up and being so kind and sweet. Your constructive criticism is always welcome. Be kind and respectful to one another, to yourselves, and to the families of the victims in the comments, please. Check out the description box for links of where you can find Gone Mysterious Disappearances Volume 1, Gone Mysterious Disappearances Volume 2, and all of my other books on Amazon, Kindle, paperback, and the Audible versions. If you want an autographed copy of any of my books or for any other correspondence to send in your own personal encounter stories with anything, extraterrestrial, supernatural, paranormal, otherworldly, etc. For any and all correspondence, please email me at GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. Please check out GemmaJadeParanormal on Rumble. We still haven't gotten that up and running because my muted summer schedule where I can only work 1 day a week and have to pile 80 hours to 90 hours worth of work into a 12-hour day. But I'm doing the best I can. I'm getting you guys as much content as possible. Come September, we're hoping to get Rumble up and moving. GemmaJadeYT on TikTok. If you guys aren't with TikTok, I get it, but like if you'd be willing to download it for me, I would really appreciate it. If you're already on it, please follow me, GemmaJadeYT on TikTok. Reach out for personal intuitive oracle readings. I do have a new price setting that I have recently incorporated into like the personal readings, the spiritual helper boxes, any spiritual video calls that we do or anything like that. It'd be better if you just emailed me about it. Let me know what you need and I'll let you know my price. I always work with you guys. I'm not here to gouge anybody. I'm just here to make a living, but also the main goal is to help you guys spiritually and support y'all. In the description box, you'll also find ways to donate to the channel, PayPal, Cash App, my Amazon wish list gift link. Please consider becoming a member or joining my Patreon. I do give free readings. The general remotes, they go from like 30 to 45 minutes to my members and my patrons as well every single month, just as a thank you, because I can't get like a lot of extra content out right now. You have to remember, guys, it's just me. Steven helps me with the live streams. Ryan helps me with the live streams. Laura helps me with the live streams, like being, you know, there to help me get extra streams on my show. But as far as the scripting, the researching, the editing, all of that, that is all me. So I can't put out much more than what I already do because there's not enough hours of the day. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. If nobody told you today, you're amazing. You rock. Abundance is your birthright. I believe in you. I got your back. Always go in grace. Smile at a stranger. And I'll see you guys next time.